Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I'm so happy to see the class is present before me. Usually I'm here before the class, but so today we are going to cover the theory of the firm. This is from chapter 5 of the Hill and Myatt anti-textbook. So first we start with some wisdom from the Quran, which is rather the opposite of what you are taught from in the economics. So Allah Ta'ala says that Allah Ta'ala has given people wealth in according to certain principles, and He has not given everyone the same amount. So there is inequality and there is a purpose for it. And one of the purposes, and there are many others, is that if some people are given too much money, then they become rebellious, they become proud. And we all know this. So to prevent them from harm and to prevent others from coming to harm because of them, Allah Ta'ala does not give everybody excess wealth. So this is the basic idea in the theory of the firm, that the main issues which arise when we study firms are missing from the textbooks. Actually today corporations are ruling the planet. The largest corporations are bigger than the nations on the earth, and they have a lot more power, and you can show that they have a stranglehold over the political processes in the USA and the world. And these things are not mentioned in your textbook. It is assumed that all firms are of the same type. They are small competitive firms which are price takers. This is the theory that you study. Occasionally you study a monopoly or an oligopoly, but these are sort of exceptional bad things which you try to control and replace it with the ideal of perfect competition. But the fact is that the world is run by these large oligopolies. In fact, some people in political science have said that the idea of nation is now an obsolete concept, because the power is now with the corporations and they are running the planet. Thinking in terms of nations is no longer useful, because the major power on this earth is the power of the corporations. But in addition to that, there are a lot of organizations like PIDE, like universities, like charities, government-run organizations which are called SOEs, state-owned enterprise, which are a huge portion, maybe more than 2/3 of the Chinese economy, which is among the dominant economies on the planet. So all of these do not run according to profit maximization. So you can't understand what they are. So the economics textbooks makes no mention of these. So how can you possibly understand what's happening in the real world when there is not even any mention made of the many different types of organization? Now in PIDE, this is a sort of a firm, organization, institution, but we are not profit maximizers. We have other purposes, and most organizations are like that. So the perfectly competitive firm, which is the central theoretical objective of the textbooks that you study, doesn't exist in the real world, except maybe in a very small minority of cases. The conditions required are almost never fulfilled. The perfect information, the zero transaction costs, it just never happens. So the theory that you study is a purely imaginary theory about an imaginary world, which does not allow you to understand the real world. So not only is that theory harmful, but there is double damage that is done. Double damage is done in the sense that the students come away with the idea that we understand, because we have been taught from the advanced textbooks and we have learned the mathematics. And so this is called in Arabic it's called jahl murakkab, or compound ignorance, meaning that ignorance is to not know something. If you don't know something, then you will study to find it out. But if you believe that you already know, that you won't even study, so you will never actually, so there are two barriers. So in fact, to learn real economics of how the world works, you have to do a lot of unlearning, because you've been taught a lot of wrong ideas, and first you have to unlearn them, then you can start learning. So first we start with a brief summary of the material that you have been taught. We study competitive firms, and the goal of the firm is to maximize profits. Now there is a strange thing that the profits is not current profit, because the firm exists for a long time. So it's the stream of anticipated future profits. Now there's a problem that nobody knows what the profits are going to be next year. There's nobody on the planet who knows what's going to happen tomorrow, and Allah Ta'ala says this in the Quran, that nobody knows what will happen tomorrow. In addition, so you have a stream of profit, so how are you going to make that into one number? Well, you have to do, economists say that you will take the net present value, the sum of, but why should you take net present value? Maybe you want to have high profits in certain periods where you think that there's going to be a lot of uncertainty, and you want to have low profits today. There can be many other reasons. So this idea that net present value is the profit criteria, it doesn't actually match what happens. And furthermore, what's your discount rate to be? Again, there's no answer to this question. Although economists have given answers to all of these, but they are not satisfactory answers. So basically, there is too much uncertainty to allow the computation. The maximization can take place only when you know all of the options, and then you know all of the consequences of all the options, and then you can compare them. In fact, the range of options open to us is so large that we can't even list all the things that we can do. So we are guided by a few things which have been tried, so this is ad hoc. Then again, what will happen if we take this action? This is again a guess. So the idea of maximization simply doesn't work. So then what is the right idea? We're not just going to criticize. Alhamdulillah that the right theory is available now. It's not that we are saying that you throw the textbook in the garbage. Yes, you should throw the economic textbook in the garbage, but it doesn't mean that you have nothing left. It means that there is a lot of work and a lot of new work. And the basic thing is that we use behavioral heuristics. We use rules of behavior that these have been studied, and these have given a lot of insight. And the thing is that because you have been fed garbage, so you have not understood anything about the world or anything about human behavior. But if you study real knowledge, then it gives you knowledge about what is happening in the world, what's happened in our lives. It's relevant, important, useful, and interesting actually. Studying these fake diagrams with this fake mathematics is just boring, because it has no relevance to anything you know. It's just an imaginary calculation. So these behavioral heuristics, these are very important and useful. These tell us how actually human beings behave. And so it gives you self-insight, that things that we do when we are faced with difficult decisions. And some of these things are wrong, and they are known that people act in this way, but this is wrong. For example, one of the well-known things is that people are very hesitant to close doors. So there are many examples. So there is something that is a dead opportunity that is gone. So the right thing for you to do would be to kill it, that okay, abandon it and go away. But people are just, the old investments that they have made, they keep them attracted. So they spend too much on past investments that they shouldn't. So once you are aware of this, then you can look at your life and you can say that okay, I'm investing too much time in these pursuits and they're not bringing me anything, so let me just stop. So this will help you with your life. So there is a huge amount of work that has been done on this, These are rules of thumbs which simplify heuristics decisions. And this is what we do. We don't maximize because it's impossible to maximize, but we follow certain rules of thumb. So, and these have been studied now by psychologists. And basically they say, how can we act when you have a small amount of information, you don't have an understanding of what will happen in the future. So then you use certain shortcuts. And one of the important books is this Gigerenzer has written a book which is not listed here, which is about what are the rules that human beings use to make decisions, and how this affects our life, and how by learning these we can improve our decision making. Okay, so that's how we should do things, but let's come back to the reality of what people are being taught these days. So the basic theory is, and then we will study how we can make it better. So basic theory is that there is a law of diminishing marginal returns, which means that firms combine inputs in order to produce an output. So one of the inputs is labor, the other is capital. Standardly, it used to be that the land was also an input, but this was taken out for reasons that we will discuss later on. Land was merged with capital, which was actually an illegitimate maneuver, because land cannot be merged with capital. The two are not the same. Land is a fixed resource, capital can be increased. Capital is manufactured, land cannot be manufactured. So for all of these reasons, land should be separate, and the agricultural sector has a different set of principles for production than the industry. But anyhow, that's not our topic today. So the point is that you have several different inputs. One of the modern production functions is the CLEM production function: capital, labor, energy, and materials. These are the four inputs that go into output. Now the point is that if you fix most of the inputs and vary one of them, then you will run into this picture, which is the diminishing marginal returns, because given that the other inputs are fixed, you can't keep on increasing. So ultimately the returns to labor will decline, and so there is this picture where initially if you have no labor, then there's no output, and as you increase labor you get increased output, but diminishing marginal returns set in, and ultimately if you use too much labor, then you don't get much out of it. So basically in the short run, some of the inputs to productive process are fixed, so ultimately you will have this increasing marginal costs, because as you put in more and more labor, you won't get as much return. So even if the labor cost is fixed, the cost per output, or the cost of the additional output, will increase. So that's the picture of the short-term marginal cost. The average cost is actually your cost of production per unit, and so basically your SRMPC, or SRMC, short-term marginal cost, should be higher than the average marginal cost in order to make your production profitable. If the short-term marginal cost is lower, then your production will not be profitable. So in this picture, you set the price equal to the marginal cost in the short run, and you make a profit by standard methodology, which I'm not reviewing here. So in the long run, things change because all factors are variable, and in this situation you can't necessarily have increasing costs. So actually the standard picture is that the long run average cost will be flat, because if you replicate all the factors, And if you double all the factors of production, then you should double the output. It seems logically valid. How can it be any other way? But for various reasons, economic theory says that you have U-shaped long-run average cost curves. So initially you have increasing returns to scale and diminishing costs, and then you reach the point at which you have smallest average cost. This is the most efficient mode of production, where you're producing all the goods at the smallest possible value. Then again the costs start to increase, so you're in a place where you have decreasing returns to scale. Alternatively, all average costs are rising. This is the standard picture. So the bottom of this curve is called the minimum efficient scale. If you are producing above this scale, where you are in the decreasing returns to scale, then the production is more costly than it needs to be per unit, and at a lower unit it's less costly than it needs to be. So there are several complications in this story which are not mentioned in this textbook. These complications have been discussed in the literature, but because they destroy the beauty of the mathematics, they are not mentioned. As Krugman said after the global financial crisis, that the profession as a whole went astray because it mistook the beauty of mathematics for truth. So a lot of things are done in your textbook because they can be done mathematically, not because they are genuine economics problems. So first thing is that the returns to sale concept is not a good concept, in the sense that if we double production, we don't want to normally double all the factors of production, because at that scale there will be some new technology available, so things will change. So if we are increasing the production by a lot, most likely all of the things that we do will change. So returns to scale suggest that we are just scaling up the production. That's not normally the case. So instead, however, the cost concept makes sense. What is the average cost as you double the production? That now, regardless of how you rearrange the factors of production, there is a cost, and that cost will either double, or it will less than double, or it will more than double. All of these things are possible. So that is called the case of increasing costs, or constant costs, or decreasing average costs. Now one more thing that is not mentioned, because basically one very major confusion and contradiction and complication that is not mentioned in textbook is that what is the picture of one firm and the whole industry. Now the way that the textbooks present it, the industry is just n times one firm, and the story that you tell for the firm is the same as the story for the industry. But in the real world, this is drastically wrong. And in fact, this is again illustration of what is called the fallacy of composition. That's if something is true for one individual, it's also true for the whole group. More recently, basically what people have started to work with is called complexity theory. And complexity theory says exactly this, that if you is exactly against the fundamental principle of economics, which is that you have methodological individualism. If you want to find out how the group behaves, find out how individual behaves and aggregate. Now complexity theory says this is wrong. And in any complex system, there are simple systems where it is true that 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals the sum. But in any complex system, you have interactions between the individuals which you cannot study when you study individuals singly. So in any complex system, the behavior of the group cannot be reduced to the behavior of the individuals. And this happens generally. So economy is a complex system. And Keynes was the first one who recognized this and stated this. But nobody understood. And to this day, economists, conventional economists, don't understand the idea of complexity. So all of the theory of firm is based on the very simple-minded idea, very stupid idea, that if you want to study the industry, you just study one firm and just multiply by n to get the behavior of the industry. As we will see, this doesn't hold. So, now how does this apply? Well, if you look at this long-run average cost curve, it has a bottom point, that is the minimum efficient scale. Now suppose that we have a large market, so the minimum efficient scale is small, that you can only produce with one plant, let's say 100 cars efficiently. If you try to produce 200 cars, you just have to work people overnight, and there are many problems which arise in coordination or organization. So this is not an efficient way to produce. So then what would the firm do? It would open up another plant. So a second plant of exactly the same. So now you have two plants, both of them producing at minimum efficient scale. So the curve that applied to one plant doesn't apply when you have two plants. So this is called the theory of the multi-plant firm, and this is not mentioned in most textbooks, and some people you do that. But just like you have this multi-plant issue, you also have this idea that, okay, suppose each firm has this U-shaped cost curve, then every firm will produce at the minimum efficient scale, but the industry as a whole will have long-run constant average cost. So what is happening, because every firm will be producing at minimum efficient scale, so they will have exactly the same cost structure, and you can put in as many firms as you like according to the standard competitive assumption. So again, what is the story at the firm level is very, very different from the story at the industry level. And since so we have to ask, are you making this U-shaped long-run average cost for the industry, or is it for the firm? Because the two are entirely different. Again, so there are many problems which occur. So basically, and these problems have been pointed out in the literature, but economists don't take them on board because this makes the mathematics very messy. In fact, that's one of the major problems of complexity theory, that you cannot do the calculations. So what you have to do is to feed it to the computer. So the Institute for Complexity in Santa Fe, California was started only recently in 70s or 80s, because then we have the capability of calculating these things. That's one of the reasons why economics, who just teach you how to calculate things on paper and pencil, they can never get there, because you cannot calculate these effects with paper and pencil. You have to feed it to the computer. That's why I'm trying to teach you some Excel, which is the minimum level of calculation you need to be able to do in order to understand some of these issues that arise when we try to study the real world instead of mathematical models. So suppose a single firm doubles the scale of operation. Suppose that the economics says that in the long run you should operate at a place where you're producing twice as much. Alright, so according to the standard economic theory, this firm is small, it uses up only a little bit more in the inputs, so this will not have an impact on the price of labor, it will not have an impact on the price of capital which is purchasing, it will not have the impact on price of energy or materials, raw materials that is purchasing, because it's a small firm, it's buying only, even though it's doubling, it's a small firm within. But suppose that this calculation is being made by all the firms in the industry, and the industry as a whole is a large player in the market normally, and so now if the industry as a whole doubles the labor it's using, then this is going to have a big impact on the labor market, and this will cause a rise in the wages. So now this is the situation that all the firms are operating at inefficient scale, so all the firms move to the efficient scale. In the process, they all double their price of labor. They are calculating that we are small firms, nothing is going to happen to labor, but actually when all of the firms demand a huge amount of labor, then the price of labor goes up. Now this calculation is not within the perfectly competitive market. So again, the calculations that are in the textbooks mess this up and actually deceive the students, because the students are thinking that the same calculation holds for the firm, and you multiply by n times that to get the calculation for the industry, but it's not true. This is the main problem with the complex system. Also, how the calculations are made cannot really be understood, because this firm, the way that the theory teaches you is that the firm is acting in isolation, and it takes everything else as given. The prices are given, wages are given, but the firm, if it is within a complex system, it knows that I am doubling, but everybody else is going to double, so something is going to happen. So for it to blind its eyes and say that nothing else is going to happen is just stupid, and no firm will do that. They will understand that other people are making other decisions, and I better take this into account. Furthermore, I cannot calculate what they are going to do, so this is an uncertainty situation. So then I am going to use heuristics, and this is how firms behave. That okay, I can't calculate what everybody else is going to do, so I will make some sensible guesses about what might happen, and I will take some precautions about what adverse situations, and I will try to get good results in this situation. Okay, so the long run equilibrium for the industry, this is what the textbooks show, that in the long run, so the firms cannot make profits, because what happens is that if you have excess profits, you are selling something at a point at which your average cost is below the market price, then you are making excess profits. Now remember that this is something which is sensible, in the sense that normal profits are that you are paying your laborers, you are paying all the factors of production, including the entrepreneurs. So everybody is getting their normal salary, which corresponds to how much they produce. Excess profits is something over and above that amount. So if you are making over and above that amount, then in principle another firm will enter, and it will cut down your profits, and ultimately the excess profits will go to zero. Again, this picture assumes that there's infinite amounts of resources available, and that even a small amount of profit, which is excess, will motivate and attract other people to enter. And in reality, this is not true. Everything is very limited. There's huge amounts of profits to be made, and the amount of resources available to chase after profits is small. So in fact, in reality, this never happens. And furthermore, this is one thing. The second argument, even more important, suppose that this mechanism is in effect, that okay, different firms are looking for, and this is true, firms are looking for profits, and they try to go, but then they will go after the maximum excess profits. And furthermore, this will be an evolutionary and dynamic process. It will not immediately converge to equilibrium like what the economic theory says. So in fact, that's an area where there is a lot of research, and a lot of research needs to be done. One thing that I can tell you is, because of the dominant, the core, the central part of the economic profession is stuck in dinosaur mode, so there is lots of good, elementary, easy research which can be done in these areas, which would not be possible otherwise if people were being sensible and trying to explore. So in evolutionary economics, we give all the firms rules of behavior, that okay, you will go after the largest profit available. So then we see what happens in such a situation, and it's not the what the economists will tell you, that eventually it will converge to zero profits. No, it doesn't happen like that. You allow for entry, you allow for exit, and often you have a complex equilibrium where some firms are chasing after profits, some firms die, new firms are born. Things are continuously in chaos, and there's no equilibrium. And there may be an equilibrium, but you never converge to that equilibrium. So then you have to study this chaos and see what patterns emerge from this process, which is continuously in disequilibrium. And that's what the world is like. And you can study that. this is exactly the goal of complexity theory, to find the patterns in complexity. But these patterns are not simple, that everything will converge to this one equilibrium, which is what the economists tell you. No. These patterns are actually meta patterns. I mean, you have this chaos. Within this chaos, and then in how do you study these evolutionary models? You run the same model thousands of times, and then you see what are the commonalities that emerge, what are the things that tend to happen. And again, these will never be laws of the kind that you're told. Most of the time this happens, but sometimes the other thing happens. So this is the kind of thing, the insight that you can get out of studying evolutionary. And these evolutionary systems you can study in two different ways. You can either give, and this is actually the hot areas of hot areas of research. One is that you can program a computer. That's called agent-based modeling and complex systems. And you can say, okay, this is the rule of the behaviors for all the firms. Now what will happen? You just feed to the computer and you see. You have 1,000 different firms with 1,000 different rules of behavior, heterogeneous firms. Nobody can calculate it in his mind, and nobody can use paper and pencil to write down a mathematical formula, but the computer has no problem with it. So now you can see, and lots of interesting things emerge when you study these things. But there is a problem with this approach, that how do you find out what the rules of behavior are? So the other aspect, the other methodology, which is complementary to this, is to use behavioral experiment. You put people in this environment and you see how they behave. Then from their behavior you deduce that these are the rules of behavior that people use, and then you put it into the computer. Because when you put people into the game, then it's difficult, complicated. You can't run it thousands of periods, for example. So both of these are complementary approaches. Both of them are useful and necessary. Now the economists assume that people behave in a very simple way, so they already have the formulas, but we don't know how people behave, so we have to learn by doing behavioral economics. And then again, what happens in systems where there are complex systems, it's too hard to run experiments like that. So there are two ways. One is to run the agent-based models. The other is to look at the real world. Again, this is something that the economists don't do. They don't look at what's happening to firms in the real world. So that's another way to study, and that's actually perhaps the most useful one. You go and look at real world and what's happening to firms and what do they do and how they decide, how they make decisions. That gives you a lot of insight. Then you can make models for it to see if you can build a model to match. But these models will not be of the type that are taught or studied in conventional textbooks. These are new types of models which are currently emerging, and just now we have a set of textbooks. They are beginning to come in, the 21st century economics textbooks, but they don't exist in the mainstream, and they're not being taught anywhere. So now there are many problems with this textbook story. The first problem is that suppose that there are increasing returns to scale. So there is meaning that there are cost savings as you expand the scale. This is a situation in which you have a natural monopoly, because only one firm is the best way to organize the market. If you have two firms, then both will be producing at higher average cost, so it's socially inefficient. So you have to look at these pictures to see how does the minimum efficient scale of production compares to the aggregate demand for the product. If the minimum efficient scale is small, then you can have then a competitive industry is possible, because then you have lots of different firms. Each of them operates at minimum efficient scale, but you can fulfill a large aggregate demand. So this is the only situation in which it is possible to have a competitive industry. If MES is large compared to the aggregate demand, then either you have oligopolies or you have a monopoly. You can't have a competitive market structure. In all cases that you study in textbooks, all firms use exactly the same technology, because the theory, the mathematics that you can solve shows that if different firms have different technologies, one of them will be more efficient and the other will be less efficient, and so one of them will drive the other out. But in reality, firms are heterogeneous. Many different technologies are being used to manufacture the same product at the same time, and then there are many different prices which prevail in the same market at the same time. And so all of these things can be taken care of in an agent-based modeling situation where you don't have full information, you have some transaction costs. Then it is possible to firms to coexist with different technologies and with different types of outputs. But in your perfectly competitive market, everybody knows everything, and there are zero transaction costs. So if one firm lowers the price by 1 cent, everybody arrives at their doorsteps because they have no cost to going there. And of course, this is a highly unrealistic assumption. And not only the fact that it's unrealistic, that everybody knows, but it makes a big difference. That is something that the economists don't agree to. They say that, okay, yes, this is an approximation, but it will give us approximately the right result. No, it gives you the completely wrong results when you make this ridiculous assumption. So all firms don't have the same technology, but this immediately, as soon as you allow for heterogeneous production, you get into problems which cannot be solved by paper and pencil, and you have to feed this to either an evolutionary model or an agent-based model or things like that. Now, when you look at the real world, you see the many differences from the theory that is taught in economics textbooks. In the theory, the firms take environment as given and they maximize at market prices and demand. But in reality, the firms are not helpless. In fact, every firm, even your corner grocer, who is a small person and he has 5 different stores right next to him, even he has market power. And so he attempts to utilize this market power in many different ways. They will try to differentiate their product. They will put a big sign on their property that our store has the lowest prices. Whether or not it's true, you don't know, but it is a slogan which will appeal to some people. Or somebody will say we have the highest quality product. Again, there's no way for you to tell, but so people will try to influence you. Now, when you come in and you say that, look, you are selling me bananas for 100 rupees and your neighbor is selling bananas for 80 rupees a kilo. You say, but have you looked at the quality? You have to open them. All of his are gala sada. So now you can't say anything. So market power is there. You can advertise to create demand. You can exercise political power. This is something which corporations do all the time, to change the institutional structure, to force people to buy from you. This happens also. We will discuss some of these cases. So there are, and in fact, cigarette industry is a big industry with very few producers who did for a long time. They suppressed the research on cancer. It was there in their files. They found it, but they suppressed it. And when other people discovered it, then they paid researchers to try to show that this research is wrong, or that there are doubts, when they knew in fact that this was not true. So then they basically, and instead of the basic information is that consumers are operating with full information, but actually there is a systematic effort to mislead the consumer, give him the wrong information. In that condition, then the whole model breaks down, because the model assumes that consumers know what is good for them. But if the consumers are learning what is good from them by advertisements which are produced by people who have the incentive to give them wrong information, then obviously the whole model of efficiency, etc., is just completely wrong. And those people who are fed this garbage will come to the wrong conclusions about how the world works. Another important issue is that firms are not monoliths. The textbook treats the firm as if there is just one person, but in fact the firms have managers, laborers, shareholders, board of governors, and all of these different stakeholders in the firm have different types of incentives. So it's very difficult to get firms to maximize profits because the managers have different incentives. This is called the principal agent problem in economic theory and studied by economists, but the issues they study have nothing to do with the reality of the firm structure. So again, we are studying more or less the conventional theory. So in the conventional theory, Piero Sraffa in 1930s sometime, when this theory was being developed, the theory of supply and demand in competitive market, he said that the assumptions that you are making are impossible to satisfy. He says that if you have increasing returns to scale, there are three cases. Increasing returns to scale, in that case, a perfectly competitive market cannot exist, because as the firm grows larger, suppose you have a competitive industry, one firm which grows large will have a cost advantage over all others, and it will drive them all out, and eventually you will end up with a monopoly. So a perfectly competitive market structure where lots of small firms is not stable. It cannot be an equilibrium. So increasing returns is incompatible. Now decreasing returns is again the situation that I mentioned, that if you have decreasing returns, then you will not produce at a place where you have decreasing, because it's beyond your minimum efficient scale. You are producing at a place where your average cost is higher than it could be. So in that case, the right structure would be for the firm to reduce the production until you get to the point where you are producing efficiently, and then for there to be multiple firms. But now again, if the firms keep expanding, then then basically you are in a situation where, although you have U-shaped curves at the firm level, at the industry level you have long run constant average cost. And this is the third case. And this is the most common case that exists in reality. That is, when we go out and study the real world, we find that industries have long run average cost curve which is constant. Now this again is incompatible with the idea of a perfectly competitive market, because that means that as many firms as you like can enter, because they all have the same cost curve. So there is no, what prevents the growth of the firm is that the cost curve turns up. So if you grow beyond that, you start producing at more expensive goods, and then you can't compete with the other firms which are producing at a better scale. But in an industry where you have constant long run average cost, as many firms as you like can enter, and so ultimately enough firms will enter that the industry will have market power, and if the industry has market power, then all of the calculations that you are making for perfectly competitive markets disappear, because if the industry expands, it will influence the inputs. In particular, if the industry hires too much labor, then you will drive up the wages, and so again so your scale operations will be, the perfectly competitive market structure does not apply. That's basically it. Some theory holds, but it's not the perfect competition. So this was Sraffa's idea. To protect against this attack, which was made in 30s, many different lines of argument were taken. So the main line of argument is what is found in your textbooks, and it does a lot of different maneuvers to protect it. One of the things which is usually not even mentioned is that the industry as a whole is a small industry within all of the industries, so that even if it expands, it doesn't affect. Now this is a very strange and implausible assumption made only to make the theory work. The other parts are the theory of imperfect competition, monopolistic competition. All of these started with Robinson and Chamberlain, who saw that perfect competition doesn't work, so we have to develop a new theory. And so there are theories, oligopolistic competition, but they don't lead anywhere for reasons that we will see. So textbooks mostly bury this whole set of ideas under the carpet. They don't even mention that this is a well-known. So in fact, when I rediscovered it on my own, I was very surprised and I was very amazed that, oh, this theory doesn't work, and I thought that this was a discovery. Later on, when I submitted it to the journal, they said, oh, this is well known. So, if it's well known, I never learned about it in my textbook. I have a PhD in economics, but they never taught it to me. So, so it turns out that all of these things are known, but they are not mentioned in textbooks because it's embarrassing. So, for example, your anti-textbook says that Edwin Mansfield has a well-known microtext. He mentions this, that, okay, the conclusion of empirical studies is that the marginal cost in the short run is constant in the relevant output range. This is at variance, seems to be at variance. It doesn't say it's flatly in contradiction with what we have been studying. But he says that, okay, marginal, maybe they are constant, but eventually they will turn up. Now this is a ridiculous thing, Yani. Okay, maybe they will eventually, but in the world that we are living in, they don't turn up. So even if they eventually turn up in the long run, it makes no difference. I mean, your theory is wrong because your theory has to be applied to the levels at which you are producing, and then at the levels which are being produced, you have constant cost, so your theory doesn't apply. So this kind of basically, I don't know what to say. I mean, how can you? This is an intellectually dishonest attitude that you ignore problems which basically sink the whole theory, and you say, okay, this is a problem, we recognize it, and we go on without making changes to the theory that are required. So, mentioned this survey before, that actually because of this Milton Friedman idea, which was actually invented to protect from attacks that were being made at that time, that we don't need to ask the firms because the firms don't know. He said the example that suppose you take a 100-year-old man and you ask him what is the secret of your long life, so he may give a long list of formulas that I ate spinach and I ate corn, I didn't do this, and I used to sleep a lot, and so on. But it may have nothing to do with why he lives long, because he doesn't know. That's certainly true, but that's very different from asking a successful firm owner what you have done, and asking all firms that what do you do, because we are trying to find out how firms behave, so the best place to ask is the firm. He gave the example that the billiard ball player, you can think of carom, if you want to predict his action, you can assume that he knows the physics, so that he hits the ball at such an angle, then it will go at such other angle in order to go into the bill, because as an expert he knows these things, even though he may not be able to write down the laws. So just like that, the firm may not be able to write down its profit function, it may not be able to use the calculus. I gave the example of the old lady maximizing her utility function, but by doing multivariable calculus and taking first order derivatives of n equation and then solving simultaneously n nonlinear equations. So the answer is that no, she is an expert in calculation, so in experience, and so she can solve these without actually doing the math. But this is just a way to actually deflect criticism, and actually it doesn't work like that even in those examples. So, but anyway, the point is that this kind of argument and reasoning prevented economists from going and looking at firms. They say we can just make up the theory in the books and we don't have to match our theory to how the firms behave. So, but some people who looked at took a survey of 200 large economic businesses, they find that 48% of the firms reported constant marginal cost, and 41% said that the marginal costs are decreasing, and only 11% said that they had increasing marginal costs. So basically your model with the increasing marginal cost doesn't apply to 90% of the firms in their sample. So basically, there is no empirical evidence for the type of cost functions that the students spend years and months, and they are frustrated and have difficulty doing all these calculations. What's the short-run marginal cost and the long-run cost and the U-shaped curve and the going through the bottom, and zillions and zillions of things that you have to memorize to reproduce for exams. It's all meaningless. I'm sorry. You wasted so much time on this stuff. So, this is the picture. That is the actual picture. That the long-run marginal cost, long-run average cost curve is above the long-run marginal cost curve. Why? Because of fixed costs. But in the once the effect of the fixed cost wears off, the marginal cost and the average cost are the same, and they basically coincide on a constant flat long-run average. This is the standard picture which emerges from study of reality. In this picture, then none of the competitive theory applies. So now you can take the textbook and throw it in the garbage. Now, furthermore, this idea that price equals marginal cost in a perfect competition, this is not even true for firms in a competitive industry, even in the textbook case. There are three different arguments which are available to prove this. One is the Stiglitz argument that there is no full information and transaction costs exist. So we already studied this argument. We showed how if you don't have full information, then different firms can charge different prices, and it might pay for the firms to increase prices, and ultimately you can get back to the monopolistic equilibrium because people don't immediately find out. So the basic statement, which you'll find in many textbooks written like that, is that if one firm raises prices, then all of its customers will leave. Now, this is just not true. This is not how it happens, and that's basically the Dixon argument, that there are adjustment lags. People don't immediately. How do if a customer is going regularly to a firm, and the firm raises its prices, the customer doesn't know that everybody else has not raised prices, and anyway, they will say, okay, I'll investigate why this has happened later. And of course, the storekeeper will say, sir, yahan pe to everybody has raised prices, even though this may not be true. So there are adjustment lags. There is no instant response. And then there is the arrows problem. Who sets the price? I mean, suppose that different people are charging different prices in different quantities, then how does the market find out? Where is this Walrasian auctioneer who learns that, okay, today the supply on the market is 9,900 kilos of potatoes, and so the price at which all of them will be exactly sold is so and so? Nobody knows. This information is not present. Everybody has a different quantity. The farmer brought in the potatoes in the morning, and nobody knows how many potatoes there are. And again, suppose that somebody does this calculation, found this is the price at which exactly the supply will equal demand, then how do the customers know which firm to go to make sure that their supply and demand are perfectly balanced so that everybody clears out of his potatoes at the evening? Again, this is impossible. I mean, the informational requirement. So the story that is told is that this will take place by convergence to equilibrium. But okay, so then what we need to do is to study the disequilibrium, that different people are charging different prices and customers are going from one to the other. They are searching for low price, but they don't have infinite amount of time. They will search at 3 places and then they will stop. So what will happen? Well, it will happen is that what will happen is that there will be a chaotic. There will not be equilibrium. There will be disequilibrium sort of situation which will persist, and that's what will happen. You can study in agent-based models which don't have equilibrium, but it will show you how much price converges. This will depend on how much searching people do, what the transaction costs are, what the information structure is. All of these things you can program into your agent-based model and learn many things about the economy which economists don't know. Under some conditions you could probably get close to the competitive equilibrium, but under other conditions you will be very far. So they are actually what you call low-hanging fruit, questions which are easy to investigate and find the answers to, which nobody knows the answers to because people have not been doing this type of research. So the arrow problem is there, that who sets the price, who finds out what is the equilibrating price, and then again, how do people go to exactly the right customer? So given that this is not going to happen, then you are going to have disequilibrium, and then you will not have a price equals marginal cost. Then there is Steve Keen's argument that even the mathematics which is done to derive price equals marginal cost, this mathematics is wrong. So basically the argument, this is a picture taken from Varian, that the market demand is sloping, but each firm has a flat demand curve. This is the argument. Now what Keen says is that this is impossible, because if you add up, no matter how many flat demand curves you add up, you can never get to a curved demand curve. So it cannot be true that each firm has a flat curve. Each firm has a slightly sloping demand, and if you add up all of the slightly slopes, you will get to the big slope. But that means that each firm must take into account the effect of its actions on price, even though it's small. The point is that people say it's small, but the thing is that for each firm it is small, but if you aggregate it over the industry, it will become big. It's like saying that, okay, there are 1,000 firms, each firm will produce only one unit, which is small, so we can ignore this and set it to 0, and so we add it all and we find that the production is 0. But if each firm produces one unit, which is small, and we add it to all the firms, then it becomes a big number. So if you have a small number but you have a large number of firms, then the small change can be a big change. And this is basically again the fallacy of composition, or the complexity argument, that what is small for one firm is not small for the industry. So this basic problem is a mathematical mistake. So this is the argument, which is so simple that I have replicated it. Okay, so this is basic mathematics. The profit is the quantity. We're looking at the ith firm. This is Keen's argument. So it produces Qi, which is a very small number, and multiplies it by the price. Now the price depends on the aggregate output of the whole industry. So it's Qi plus Q star I, which is the production of all other firms. So the sum of those two is the aggregate industry output, minus the cost which is only applies to Qi, your own production. Alright, so we maximize profits in the standard way by differentiating this to Qi. So we have two terms. One is partial of Qi with respect to Qi times P, and the other is Qi times partial of P with respect to Qi minus partial of C with respect to Qi. So the first term is the price, because partial Qi with respect to Qi is 1. So you have price. Now what the textbook says is that the second term is 0 for us, for a competitive industry, because the price will not change when you differentiate with respect to Qi, because Qi is very small, so when you change Qi, it has no impact on the price. So that derivative is small. So the Qi term, this is the marginal revenue term, this term disappears. So you have the third term is just marginal cost. So basically that gives you the famous price equals marginal cost formula, which is supposed to be true for competitive industry. But if you actually do the math, you find that the partial of P with respect to Qi is not 0, but it is exactly the same as it is for monopolies. Why? Well, you just look at that derivative. It's the partial of P with respect to Qi. Now there's this chain rule that you have partial P with respect to Q and then partial Q with respect to Qi. So the first term is P prime of Q, which is the change in the marginal, which is basically the derivative of the demand for the monopoly. The second term is 1. What is the derivative of the aggregate quantity with respect to the quantity that you are producing? The aggregate quantity is the sum of all the quantities. So when you differentiate it with respect to your quantity, all other terms go to 0, but there is one term which is equal to 1. So it means that the partial P with respect to Qi is not small because Qi is small. Partial of P with respect to Qi is the same as partial P with respect to Q, which is the derivative that the monopoly would have. So the derivative is the same exactly of the price of the individual firm and for the monopoly. So the idea that it becomes smaller for the firm is just a mathematical mistake which Steve Keen has pointed out, and he has pointed out the consequences of this mistake. But economists are very unwilling to listen to this. So the story of the competitive equilibrium is just completely bogus. It's full of contradictions, full of a fallacy of composition, wrong story being told everywhere, wrong mathematics. And the purpose of the whole thing is to prove one thing, that a perfectly competitive market gives ideal results. But actually, even taking everything for granted, the price is not equal to marginal cost, and so the perfectly competitive market doesn't give the supposedly good results that it is supposed to. So even under the full information, zero transaction cost, even in that case, the case that the textbook wants to make, that free markets are great, cannot be made. So there's a contradiction between an equilibrium concept based on price taking and the idea that the firms are have some market power. These two things cannot be reconciled. Even if you have 1,000 firms, in fact, somebody has mathematically proven that you have to let the firms go to infinity in order to get the perfect competitive result. So in their mind, they were proving that this shows that the perfect competitive theory is true, but you can also take it to say that this proves that perfect competition is impossible, because there's never a situation where we can have an infinite number of firms, and as long as we have a finite number of firms, we don't have perfect competition. So it doesn't hold for any finite number of firms. So now we turn from the textbook to the reality of firm behavior, and today we find that corporate power makes the firms stronger than nations today, as I mentioned. And how does this happen? Well, there are think tanks funded by corporations. These think tanks produce the policy papers which are read by the public and the policy makers in order to make policies, and this is what determines what the policies are. And in Washington, registered lobbyists, these are people who are paid large salaries to go and talk to companies and influence them. These are outnumber members of Congress by 65-1, and they spend about $200 million a month just to lobby the case of their clients in the Congress. And you can be sure that these are a profit-making firms, so this money is not being wasted. So one especially notorious industry is called Big Pharma, which is mentioned in the text, so I'm mentioning it. There's also the Seven Sisters of Oil who run the world and are a cause of wars and many other actions being done on the planet. So in 1930s in the US, the Rockefellers privatized healthcare. Previously it was social medicine. Now, and this has shaped the structure of healthcare in the USA. The top 11 corporations made $750 trillion. So where is this excess profit being driven to zero by free entry into the firm? The net profit of these 11 amounted to 85 billion. And what does profit maximization do? Well, profit maximization leads to this problem of things called orphan drugs. There are drugs which are known which would solve the problems of thousands of people. But if these thousands of people are living in Africa, they are poor, and so the cost of production of the drug is too large. So these 1,000 people will be allowed to die because there is no profit in saving their lives. On the other hand, what is happening today is that Big Pharma is making genetically engineered, tailor-designed personal drugs which will work only on one person, because the multimillionaires and the billionaires can afford to pay for them. And drugs like aspirin and common cold, things which will bring benefit to the masses, they have abandoned because there's too little profit in them. So this is what profit maximization, this is what the efficient market economy does. So now, in contrast to the story that the advertisement provides information and research creates information, this is one story which is mentioned in the, I think it's not in the text, but there's this organization in the Big Pharma which is Medtronic, and it paid $200 million to a group of doctors and corporations and $35 million to orthopedic surgeon, and then they co-authored a series of papers saying how this medicine, it's actually a bone growth drug, is so beneficial, and billions of dollars were sold. But independent research showed that there is no benefit from this drug. And this is just one case, and there are thousands of such cases. And furthermore, it causes serious harms, this medicine, which is being sold for a profit. So then the issue arises that how can a small minority of people do things which are harmful to millions and millions of people? I mean, technically one would think that the combined action and power of a group would be larger than the possibility of a small group. So in that there is some interesting results. As Mansoor Olson has written a book called The Logic of Collective Action, and basically he says that some groups find it easier to act collectively than others. So if you have a small group of people, they can make a collective decision. If you have a large group of people, it is very hard for them to take a common decision and act together to protect their own self-interest. As a result, the main result of Olson's theory is that there is a systematic tendency for small groups to exploit large groups. So one example of this is called the class action problem. For example, tire was manufactured by Firestone, which had the property that when driven at high speeds it would explode. Now this could cause fatal accidents, but even when it didn't, it was a defective tire. Now for one person, if he has a defective tire, he replace the tire. For one person to make a case against a tire company when the tire costs $65 is not sensible, because filing the suit will take thousands of dollars. So there is a remedy for this which is called the class action suit, and it was actually done in this particular case. Some lawyers got together and they filed an action on behalf of the millions of consumers affected, and they sued the Firestone company for millions of dollars. for manufacturing this defective tire, and of the profits they took millions of dollars and gave some money to the consumers, so on whose behalf they were fighting the case. Now, very interestingly, in Islamic tradition, from the very first day, the Prophet ﷺ introduced this institution of hisbah. Hisbah is called a market regulation mechanism. So there are many rules which apply, and these institution of hisbah, they can file these class action suits on behalf of the consumer, and they don't charge money for it. And so there are many different ways to take care of these problems, but today the problem is that the corporations have so much power that they are creating institutions all over the world, like we have our free market think tank in Pakistan as well, which is supposed to propagandize people to believe in the virtues of the free markets. And so people will not understand that market regulation is very important and useful and necessary. And if we don't have that, and what is the argument? Of course, if the government regulates, the government is corrupt and inefficient, and they will cause this and that and the other. All of this is true in some sense. You can always find examples of government corruption, but actually the truth is that corruption is a state of the society. What the wrong argument that is made is that markets are less corrupt than governments. Actually, once you examine the data, you find that corruption is a standard of integrity which exists in the society. The same people work in markets and the same people work in government. So whatever the level of integrity exists in the society, it will be found in the market and in the government. So both will be corrupt. So if you want to argue that markets are not corrupt and government is corrupt, this is wrong. This is used to say that we should privatize everything and so on. Actually, when you look at the empirical data on privatization, you find that it's a massive amounts of failure, and there are many reasons for that. But anyway, the point is that the dominant theories that are in the world are being taught to people in universities by a syllabus which is designed to indoctrinate people to believe in free markets. Now, deception is a common strategy. There's deceptions. One is to train students to believe in free markets, but the other is in the real world to make sure that the right laws are passed. And again, this is a situation in which you have a small corporation, you have a large public interest. So how can the corporation influence the large number of public to believe in their stories? So a common strategy is to create an organization which is called a front organization, which looks like it is a common public organization, but it is actually secretly being funded by the corporation. So there are many, many examples of this. One is called CALA, Citizens Against Lawsuit Abuse, which was the documentation and the literature for this organization says that small businesses are being sued by people, and so there is too much litigation and people have to pay, and if somebody slips on a banana peel, he can sue the homeowner and he can get $1 million. So we should put a bound on this. We should make sure that the amount that is paid is reasonable and so on. And so this is the front. But the reality is that when you make that law, it makes Philip Morris, the cigarette manufacturer, immune from suits which were being brought against it for people saying that you are marketing this product, cigarettes, and you know that it is causing cancer. So multi-million-dollar suits. Why are you marketing this? Why you should not be marketing a product? If somebody markets poison and charges money for it, then obviously he would be subject to a lawsuit. And similarly, so this kind of lawsuits were successfully made, and so this was done to prevent them. Then there's a GMO, which is a bioengineering organization. This is currently happening today. In California, some citizens are organizing to say that if a product has been genetically modified, there should be a label on that, so that we can know. So now the GMO wants to fight this. They don't want their products to be labeled because they know people will avoid it. So they have created this organization called Citizens Against Expensive Labeling. And so they say that they are saying that, if manufacturers put labels on it, this will raise the prices and it will cause us any harm. This is completely ridiculous because it doesn't cost anything to print the label. And many other ridiculous arguments. And the front is that this is a organization to protect the consumer interest, but actually it is a organization which is protecting corporate interests, but secretly. Most important is this Merchants of Doubt book, in which you see basically corporations were making a lot of profits by causing environmental damage and leading to climate change. And they realized there's lots of environmental groups, and if these environmental laws then this will raise our costs by quite a lot. We'll have to put in money to stop pollution and stuff. So they created organizations whose job was to discredit research about climate change. So this is really most horrifying, and these people are prepared to destroy the whole planet, and in fact the whole of human existence is in peril. Serious. This is not a joke. There are some predictions in the worst case scenario by 2050 the planet could become uninhabitable for human beings. The polar ice caps have already melted, and for the first time last season a ship was able to navigate right across to the across the polar ice cap, which was not possible because there was too much ice there. Polar bears are dying because their natural habitat has been destroyed, and hundreds of thousands of species have been wiped off of plants, animals, insects, and the oceans have become acidic, which has caused, and the atmosphere is polluted. So any large scale damage is being done, and we are experiencing the impacts of this in Pakistan. Multiple, there have been 3 major hurricanes in the past 10 years, which used to occur in 100 years in the USA. So despite this, there is this huge lobby which is just saying, oh, climate change is myth, climate change is myth, and convincing stupid people like Trump to that this is true. So what is the point? That this is the effect of corporate propaganda to misinform people. The opposite side of this is, of course, on the one side we have power, and on the other side we have the public is not able to act or not interested in acting. So you find that very few people are going to vote. There are many reasons for this. There's the free rider problem. If it takes thousands of people to do something, then for no one person it is important. If all the other people are doing it, then you are not necessary, and if nobody is doing it, then again your action doesn't matter. So this is a very big dilemma. If everybody does his part, then things can change, but people don't have the incentive to do their part. So there's Mullah Nasruddin's story that for some reason they wanted a lot of milk. He said everybody should put in a cup of milk into this common pot, and then we will have enough milk for the purpose. So I think there was a wedding and they wanted to have for the guests. So everybody in the village put in 1 cup of milk in the morning. They looked at the cup and it was all water because everybody figured that as long as the 99 other people put milk, nobody will notice my water. But since everybody put in water, so there was no milk in there. So this is the problem of collective action. So this is also the voter paradox, that why should you go to vote? The chances that your vote will be the deciding vote is very little, and as long as your vote is not the deciding matter, it doesn't matter whether you vote or don't vote. So again, Islam has a solution to this, and it says that you act not for the outcome. So again, instead of you act because the action is the right action to do. So once you take this on board, once it's not that you are acting in order to achieve the goal, you are acting because this is the right thing to do, this gets rid of the problem. But this is something which today has been forgotten in Islamic societies as well. And so there are two modes of thinking. One is consequentialist. This is what utility theory and economics is teaching, that the only thing which matters is the outcome. It doesn't matter how you get there, whether you lie, cheat or steal. If you get to a good outcome, you're good. As opposed to this, there's how you play the game. This is the Islamic way of thinking. Outcomes are not in our hands at all. Even if everybody acts rightly, maybe the wrong thing will happen. But the only thing we are responsible for is our own behavior. So if we act correctly, we will reach the right result. If we act correctly, that is already the right result, because that's all we will be asked about. We will not be asked about whether you succeeded, whether you won the game or whether you lost the game. It doesn't matter. It is whether you played according to the rules. So I'm going to go quickly through the rest of the slides. There is a whole theory of how the firm behaves. There are different stakeholders, board of governors, managers, shareholders, laborers, and so the idea that the firm can act in one way is simply wrong, and so the idea that the firm can maximize profits is just not a depiction of reality, because the firm doesn't exist. I mean, you have different stakeholders doing different things, they all act in different ways, and different results can emerge depending on who has more power, what is the legal structure, and so on. One of the common theories of the firm is this shareholder value theory, that the firm should only act to maximize profits. This has caused a tremendous amount of damage. It is a very wrong theory, and Harvard MBA professor said that I taught these theories, but what I have come to believe is that what we taught caused real suffering, damaged and destabilized the world economy, and so on. So they have come to realize this, but corrections have not been made. Now, what is really true, if you look at real world firms, that they act on two rules basically. Profits are important to them, but they don't maximize profit, they want stability. So if you have profits, a certain amount of profits, you want to make sure that you have little bit more profit next year, because that's what stability is. And even if you can make more profits, you want to keep it, because the manager wants to have his performance evaluated. It doesn't matter for him to make huge amounts of profits, because these profits will be going to the shareholders, so he doesn't want to maximize them. He wants to make sure that he keeps his job. So he is interested in profits, and but profits are he keeps them stable and he keeps them growing. These are the main targets of the firms. There are alternatives to conventional firm organization. There is the labor managed firm, and the firm in which you have labor zone. This has an entirely different theory. There's a book, there's an article, survey reference, which describes all of the real world firms. There's lots of them which are labor managed and labor owned, and it has a lot of efficiency. And basically the survey says that there is a large contrast between the theory, which says, oh, if you don't profit maximize, then this harmful thing will happen and that harmful thing happen and that, and the practice which shows that none of these things happen. And so there is a whole problem that the theory, which is economic theory, which applies to labor managed firms, does not apply. So for this reason, Vanek, who was one of the people who has strongly recommended this form, said that there is something called X efficiency. These firms become mysteriously efficient in ways which are not predicted by the theory. And we as human beings can understand this, because human beings are not motivated solely by profits. If you have ownership of a firm, then you want to see it grow and prosper, even though it doesn't bring you personal benefits. Now, the theoretical calculations are done on the basis that you only maximize your share. So if something is going to harm the firm but increase your share, then you do it. And on that basis, then the theory leads to very strange and difficult and different conclusions. But in reality, this is not how it happens. If people feel ownership, then they take pride and then they behave differently from how Now, because of all of these differences, the theory of Islamic firms is now coming up. Shahid Qureshi in IBA has developed such a theory, and he has devised a course on entrepreneurship based on Islamic rules, in which on at least 5 different points, all of the ways in which you are supposed to think and act are different from what is taught in a conventional MBA. And he has taken this model and presented it in the USA, even in Harvard. And because people are dissatisfied by their model, they understand that actually firms cannot be profit maximizing. You have to take into account the human element. One of the key things of the Islamic firm is a complete reversal of the MBA paradigm. In the MBA, the bottom line is everything. You provide service to people in order to earn profits. In the Islamic firm, we reverse this. We say that we earn profits in order to provide service. Like naively, we say that, okay, we should provide service, and suppose we start distributing our products for free. Well, how long can you do that? Maybe 1 day, maybe 2. So it's clear that we need to earn profits in order to pay our employees, in order to pay in order to buy resources, in order to grow the firm, in order to do research. All of these things are, so on the surface, the firm looks exactly like its counterpart, profit maximizing firm, because they're doing all the things. They're paying their employees well, so they are motivated and so on. But the niyat, the intention is different. Now, according to standard theory, intentions don't matter, only the observables do. But actually, in reality, intentions make all the difference, because once your intention is service, then you look at how much service you are providing. At the end of the year, instead of looking at how much profits I made, you look at how much service we provided and whether we can provide it better and whether we can do it for more quality. This actually completely changes everything, but I don't have time to go into that. So this is, I think, the last slide. Yeah. The basic central problem that occurs in your traditional social science as originated in the West is that they have complete misunderstanding of human beings. They don't know anything about the human being because they have reduced the human being to the mind alone. So it's rational. The human beings in economic theory have no hearts. The idea of utility maximization, it says that you maximize, which means that you are cold. What does it mean, cold? It means that you have no emotions. You cannot be excited. You cannot be impressionable. So this idea of impulse buying, that suddenly you see something and you are attracted to it, this doesn't exist for the rational consumer. They are callous. They don't care anything about anybody else. Only my consumption matters. Your consumption is not in part of mine. And they are calculating. They are calculating always to the last penny the advantage and then trying to take advantage of it. All 3 assumptions are wrong about human behavior. And the labor theory is wrong because they assume that humans dislike labor and must be paid to do it. Actually, humans enjoy working in the right environment, and so they will not require, and if you provide them with the right environment, they will not need pay. There are lots of examples to show this. Furthermore, money is not the prime motivator. You have all been taught to believe that money is the biggest and most important motivator of human beings. But Daniel Pink, you can watch his videos, they are available on YouTube, shows that money is not the biggest motivator of human beings. It is true that in simple repetitive tasks, like you are doing something which is, putting stamps on something, if you offer more money, you can improve efficiency. But any complicated task where thinking is involved, very strangely, offering more money causes a loss of performance. Very strangely, because when people start thinking about money, this interferes with their higher level thought processes. And so this is a standard phenomena. You can look it up. And so basically, what are people motivated by? They are motivated by the desire for mastery, for knowledge, their desire by curiosity, by autonomy, the desire to be independent. So there are lots of motivations which take precedence over the desire for money. And so when we understand this, and again, Islam offers us a lot of deep insight into human beings and who they are and how their nafs misleads them and how their soul can be guided. And using these, we can construct different types of firms and different types of models for economy which are far superior to anything which currently exists on the planet. And these things did exist in an Islamic economy, and we, for 1,000 years, we organized an economy in such a way that every child could get an education. Anybody who was sick would get treatment, and they would not have to pay for it. Even the concept of paying for an education is alien to Islam, because the education in Islam is conceived of in the opposite way, that the person who has the knowledge, he has the responsibility to deliver the knowledge to those who don't have. It is not the other way around. And so for 1,000 years, the society was organized in such a way that there was no one hungry, and everybody had access to education, health, and basic needs, because the rich people were told that you are responsible for the poor. And the society as a whole, everybody has the feeling today in the individualistic market society, I am taught from birth that I am only responsible for myself. But in Islamic society, you are taught from birth that the society, that all the children of Pakistan are my children, and it is our collective responsibility to educate them. If they fail to get an education, I will be asked about my share of this job. So this is a completely different way of thinking about society, radically different from the capitalist view, which puts everybody individual all alone and says that you are a profit seeker and you should seek the maza zindagi ka despite whatever is happening to the rest. So you go and have your 10,000 meal in Serena while the person who is serving you, his child is hungry and he needs medicines. You don't care about that. So that is the way of thinking which is taught and which is developed by economics. As I said, Julie Nelson has written an article which says how economic theory poisons your morality. And so there is a huge job that needs to be done. I'll stop here. Thank you.